Hello. Well, it's time for some tea. Tea and truth. I'm Dr. Deborah Owens, literacy professor and education policy researcher, and I'm here to share with you some truth about education. I'm often asked about NAEP, what it is, what the data from NAEP reported in the nation's report card actually means, and why it's so important. And how come it garners so many headlines? Well, I learned a lot about NAEP while researching for my book, The Origins of the Common Core. So I'd like to share with you what I learned then and since about the National Assessment of Educational Progress, commonly called NAEP. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, is the largest nationally representative continuing evaluation of the condition of education in the United States. It has served as a yardstick of student achievement since 1969. Through the nation's report card, NAEP informs the public about what American students know and can do in various subject areas and compares achievement among states, large urban districts, and various student groups. This is the description of NAEP from the National Assessment Governing Board, the governmental agency created by Congress in 1988 as an independent, nonpartisan board to set policy for NAEP, also known as the nation's report card. Since its inception, NAEP was carefully designed to avoid being used to subvert state control over education or create a national curriculum. It's important to understand that NAEP is not a high-stakes test. It does not examine a particular school curriculum, nor does it measure the adequacy of a particular school or district, or assess individual student success. Furthermore, NAEP is not administered to all students in America. It's administered to samples of students across the country. And of those students sampled, no one will take the entire test. Students never receive a test score. As a matter of fact, most students will most likely never take the NAEP assessment. A great deal of attention has been given to creating a statistically sound assessment. The sampling method is common practice in large studies that gather data and extrapolate findings from that data. The nation's report card publishes those findings from NAEP data. Arguably, although NAEP does not purport to be high stakes for students, schools, districts, and states, it is very high stakes for the education system in the United States. Headlines routinely report alarming headlines about how poorly our students are performing. It's for this reason it's important to understand the story of NAEP and how it has become the largest producer of headlines regarding our education system. This governmentally funded assessment system costs over $175 million a year. And just as it generates alarming headlines, it also generates a great deal of confusion about what it measures and what it means for America's students, teachers, and schools. In 1964, the Carnegie Corporation funded the development of the National Assessment. When NAEP was first implemented in 1969, participation was voluntary for states and school districts. The Education Commission of the States, ECS, oversaw the administration of NAEP in the early years. This was to ensure that control was always in the hands of the state and not the federal government. NAEP gained a great deal of traction in the 1980s. President Reagan commissioned a panel to create a report on the state of education in the United States in 1983. That report would be entitled A Nation at Risk. NAEP assessments had been in place for 14 years by 1983, but interestingly, NAEP data were not used or included in this very consequential report. As an aside, I'll discuss a nation at risk in a future video. However, before 1983, standardized testing wasn't the norm for all states and schools, and the concept of high stakes testing didn't even exist. Because NAEP utilized a sampling method of students, and states and school districts could decide whether or not to participate in NAEP, the authors of A Nation at Risk decided that the data from the assessment did not provide adequate data to draw conclusions about American education. When A Nation at Risk was released to cataclysmic headlines declaring our nation's schools to be an abject failure in need of major reform, NAEP would be revamped to meet the supposed need for detailed data about America's schools. After 1983, NAEP control was transferred to Educational Testing Services, ETS, through a federal grant to administer the NAEP program. In 1986, NAEP assessments were redesigned and became a powerful tool in the ongoing quest to critique the education system in the United States. By 1988, NAEP partnered with the National Assessment Governing Board, appointed by the Secretary of Education, William Bennett. While NAEP participation is still considered voluntary for districts and states, states who receive Title I federal funds for districts with low student achievement are required to participate. And because all 50 states receive Title I money for some districts, then NAEP has, in effect, full participation. Let's examine the role of the nation's report card. The terms nation's report card and NAEP have become interchangeable. Let's say you live in a suburban area and you're interested in examining the NAEP scores for your particular school district. Well, you can access your school district on the nation's report card, which is available online. However, if you look for NAEP scores, you'll find a notation that says only state scores for NAEP are reported. Well, this is obviously because NAEP is not designed to examine all school districts' performance for the reasons mentioned earlier. You can, however, access a report that includes data from the state-mandated tests in various subjects. Why is this important? Well, I think it creates a certain amount of confusion. Why are we reporting NAEP scores when the state-level assessments are considered to be the high-stakes assessments for student achievement individually and are used to make instructional changes or curricular decisions for districts and to assess teacher performance? In part 2 of our discussion of NAEP, we'll discuss how test items and questions are constructed for this assessment, what the achievement levels actually mean, and examine the sampling method employed by NAEP for this very important assessment.